Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam President. I hadn't expected to rise as quickly as you called me, and I do confess that I had my standing orders crisp and ready for Senator Baig in case he decided to speak. So that notwithstanding, it gives me great pleasure to wrap up this debate and to address the very important observations made by honourable senators. I wish to compliment the honourable senators on the independent bench, many of whom I have heard for the first time on this bench. Of course, that is not to say that I haven't heard them elsewhere in their very strong advocacy as leading personalities in their own right. I reflect very warmly upon the fact that Sir Hugh Wooding Law School, it was Senator Hazel Thompson, I.E., who first took me into the legal aid clinic and put me on the straight and narrow, and I thank her publicly for that exercise that she put me through. Madam President, we've effectively had a few different arguments this evening. On the opposition bench, there was approbation and reprobation at the same time. There was a lot of song, dance, rhythm, and decibels around why scorn should not be poured. The exhortation coming from Senator Mark in particular involved the usual application of opposition positions. This bill is not ready, we need to talk some more, the process was bad, we need to take some more time, the opposition is being forced to agree with something. The positions coming from Senator Haynes sort of mirrored that position. Senator Hussain made some rather interesting submissions, if I put it that way. On the one hand, talking about matters such as the history of the UNC's march towards getting us here, acknowledging in full form that in March 2010, when the first Pair 1 formula of form went out, that the PNM had not filled out the form. And that's true. We did not fill out the form, because had we filled out the form, we would have been complying to a process that we were not ready for yet. And then Senator Hussain went further to say, thank the Lord that the UNC filled out the form in June, even though they weren't a member of the Global Forum. But by that very act of self-congratulations and filling out the form, the die was cast in 2010, more than 8 years ago, putting Trinidad and Tobago onto a trajectory for the passage of this law. The fact is, Senator Hussain went even further to say something which is the opposite of what has been said. And what was rather curious about Senator Hussain's contribution is that his own colleague sitting on the same bench referred to the fact, and Senator Mark, the leader of his bench, said that the Attorney General was quoted as saying, this would be death by 1,000 cuts. And then Senator Hussain stands up and goes, the sky is going to fall, the government says. I mean, which is it? Do they, as Senator Haynes says, caucus diligently and prepare? Because if a mere one person away from Senator Mark, the submission that comes is that the sky will fall, and that the clock turned on the 30th of November and the sky did not fall, well then how does that reconcile with the leader of the bench saying that the government's position is that this will be death by 1,000 cuts? It goes further. Senator Obika then went into the understanding of what the application of enhanced due diligence looks like. And for the record, Senator Hussain's submission that somehow the government has portrayed that the Global Forum will blacklist us and apply sanctions, most respectfully, that's not the case. We have never said, nor can we say, that the Financial Action Task Force or the Global Forum are the ones who can blacklist you. They will rate you, state you, and then they may recommend for correspondent banks and for financial institutions that they apply a host of remedies. So it betrays any form of analysis of the genuine position, and regrettably it falls within the argument offered by Senator Haynes, and that is the chaos theory. Now, most respectfully, let's for one moment say, forget the he say, she say, forget the you had 8 years warning, the steps were taken, the legislation is supposed to be done, forget the who started and who didn't. If I try to distill the arguments coming from the UNC bench, most respectfully, the only argument that I have heard is an allegation that it is unconstitutional. That's it. The reference that my learned colleague, Senator Ramdeen, for whom I have a great deal of respect, and I'll tell you why I have a lot of respect for Senator Ramdeen. He's a good advocate. He's a compelling speaker. The gravitas of his tone can sometimes mask how thin the substance of his argument may be. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean that in the best way possible. I compliment my learned colleague for making a case sound good. So let's address the one argument raised by the one senator from whom I have found some substantive issue on the opposition bench before I get to the independent bench. I thought Senator Ramdeen did a good job in raising the arguments of the Constitution. Indeed, his statement that Section 2 of the Constitution, which describes the Constitution as the supreme law of Trinidad and Tobago, is true. He sensibly recognized that there is no absolute right in the context of Sections 4 and Section 5 of the Constitution. And it's true we have qualified rights. But most respectfully, Senator Ramdeen, I was very, very careful, through you, Madam President, to not want to treat this Parliament as a court of law. Because respectfully, I'm not speaking to lawyers. The view and role of the legislature is to make laws for the peace, order, and good governance of Trinidad and Tobago. That isn't something made up. That's something which is specified at Section 53 of the Constitution. Under Part 2, Powers, Privileges, and Procedure of Parliament, 53, Parliament may make laws for the peace, order, and good government of Trinidad and Tobago, so however that the provisions of this Constitution or, so far as it forms part of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, the Trinidad and Tobago Independence 1962 Act, UK, etc., may not be altered except in accordance with Section 54, which tells you what your majorities are to alter things. And in this discussion, where we are not speaking to lawyers, my role is not to impress honourable members opposite with a ring-band of cases. That's for the court. My role is to set on the parliamentary record the principles for interpretation of the laws which a court will do. Because there's a separation of powers in the model of our Constitution, where you have the executive, Section 76, 79, etc. You have the judiciary, when you deal with the chapter on the judiciary, and you have the legislature. And those three limbs, which are interconnected, there are rules and boundaries such that Parliament makes the law, it's the supreme law, and the judiciary's job in considering whether law is virus, whether it is constitutional, has two purposes. And the purposes are not complicated purposes. On the one hand, it's to interpret the law, and on the other hand, it's to interpret it against the Constitution. And yes, there is a concept of proportionality. That's why I started off on describing the three legitimate aims of the bill. And yes, I constantly, as Attorney General, bearing in mind that the courts may be invited, as Senator Ramdeen has threatened, to consider the constitutionality of law, my obligation is to put on the parliamentary record a description of proportionality. But to do that, I need only state the aims of the bill. And those aims I have stated: FATF, Global Forum, and Trinidad and Tobago's situation of who we are, as Senator Vera so eloquently described. Secondly, in describing proportionality, I need only look to describe whether the measures of the bill are rationally connected to the prescriptions for the legitimate aims. And thirdly, and quite simply, all that I need to do is to set out whether the means go effectively no more than necessary. And yes, one could recite the history of the development of the argument of proportionality. R.V. Oakes, De Freitas, Surratt, Maraj, Northern Construction. Because I don't say it doesn't mean I don't know it. This is not a court of law. This is speaking to the people of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, that's where I characterize my learned colleague Senator Ramdeen's advocacy as good advocacy, but on a slim submission. And I mean that in the best way possible. I want to draw a reference to Section 53 of the Constitution because Senator Dayal Singh expressed concern about who's right. First of all, I will return to the statement of Prime Minister Mia Mottley yesterday in claiming the land you have. If not now, when? If not us, who? And in coming to this submission, I want to go back to Section 53 of the Constitution. It is trite law, it is simple law, that there is an axiomatic connection between national security and the development of law and due process. You see, our Constitution permits laws to be made, and due process is often the counterbalance to an allegation of a lack of constitutionality. It isn't, as simply put, that we just slapped on the label of having a judge offer the consideration for the granting of tax-paying information. It isn't that. There's a body of law, and I found, as I looked quickly across, I found the dicta of Justice Saunders in Belize versus Zuniga. And in that, the statement coming out of that court in particular was the national security component of due process, and due process is found in our Constitution. And the submission coming out of that case, in effect, which I hang my hat on, which the government hangs its hat on, is that there can be construed to be a live abdication of constitutional responsibility as lawmakers if we don't treat with the issues that plague our society, and therefore the level of intrusion that we're going to have on enshrined rights, which are qualified rights. So this right of private life, family life, must be counterbalanced against the other competing Section 4 right, which is the right of the individual to the safety, the property, take the other whole Section 4 rights. We have the opportunity not only to consider right to private life, right to privacy and family life, but we must consider the safety of the individual, the safety of our society, where runaway crime is taking us, and factor it in the formula of due process. And therefore, I respectfully argue, I respectfully urge honorable members to not be tripped up on the fact of a bare allegation that this bill is unconstitutional. And for the record, the courts are there to test that. We have no fear of that. And sometimes, as happened in one case, for instance, in this Parliament's life, this 11th Republican Parliament, we did an order for the appointment of a commissioner of police. We said this country deserves a commissioner of police. Let us amend the order for the appointment of a commissioner of police. It was challenged by the opposition, and the court at first instance made some minor amendments to the wording of the order. We could have appealed it and proved the point right, but we said, you know what, this country deserves a commissioner of police. And therefore, we elected not to disturb the High Court judge's decision. We could have gone to the Court of Appeal. We didn't, because it would have delayed the appointment of a commissioner of police. And I think Trinidad and Tobago today is agreeing in round measure that Commissioner Griffith was a very good choice for this country. But had we gone to the Had we gone after the High Court to the Court of Appeal to then the Privy Council to be referred back to the judge, in 2022 we would have been still working with the same system. So sometimes you allow your opponents to feign a victory and let them celebrate. Our celebration is quite simple. We got a commissioner of police. And that's where the balancing of rights and the choice to be made comes into context. So after we have addressed constitutionality, pick one issue from the entire opposition bench. There is no issue to be found. If you remove the fancy footwork, let's talk some more, let's dance some more, this is not good law. We said we would meet, but we didn't meet, and we wanted a joint select, and we had a special select, but we didn't turn up, and we're sorry we didn't turn up, and we were working diligently. I'm not sorry they didn't turn up. The truth falls from the mouth of babes, most respectfully. The honest truth. Honorable senators, confess now, we are happy we didn't turn up. You see, that is almost Freudian, I dare say. Because the truth is that the global forum mechanisms are part of the legitimate aims of this bill. We have quite simply been told that in order to sign on to the multilateral convention, we have to amend the income tax law. Madam President, I sat in this Senate somewhere in front of Senator Vera, where he sits now, on the opposition bench, and for that time debated several pieces of law to treat with the Financial Intelligence Unit, the Proceeds of Crime, the Anti-Terrorism Act, all FATF driven. Special majority laws. There were times, and Senator Vera, who sat in that parliament with me, can testify, when the entire independent bench voted against the government's bill, as happened with the Children's Act, for instance. Every single member on the opposition bench, as I recall, failed to give an affirmative vote. And it was the opposition that voted with the government after I personally introduced 224 amendments that night on the floor to deal with that legislation. But we never once asked, let me see the letter, I don't trust you, I want to come back to that, let's have a joint select committee, let's not turn up. So where are we in terms of this blame game position? It really doesn't take us far, Madam President. Madam President, Senator Ramrat said something that I'd like to underscore. We're going to have to come back to Parliament in the month of December to debate more FATF work. Why? This is not a static position. When Minister Imbert, in the letter read out by Senator Hussain, referred to certain deadline dates and referred to the concept of making best efforts by drafting laws, having the Global Forum work on it with us, having the EU, the OECD work on it, give their comments, share it with the opposition, share it with Senator Richards as he participated as an independent senator with their marked up comments on the bills, the position changed. Introduced into another piece of law is this whole concept of the elimination of free zones. That's no simple issue for a developing country like Trinidad and Tobago. And when they throw that bogey at you, Madam President, you have to hold strain and watch what your position is. Because Panama and other jurisdictions have significant exceptions, and you can't be applying a standard to the developing Caribbean market, our microeconomies, and you have inconsistencies in the OECD and G20 countries. And that makes reason to pause. The Minister of Trade is wrestling with the issue on a day-by-day basis. And the honorable members opposite, some of them, Senator Mark in particular, they've sat in government. This is not a static position. The FATF, in its 4 plenaries per year, have amended their recommendations and analytical tools. In fact, in Paris, in this October season, they amended the regulations again. And they told you the amended regulations that we've gone out, you have to apply to be re-rated on that basis, because they constantly change the goalpost on you. So this isn't a carte blanche. This is the milestone, that is the milestone approach. This is a trotting, developing democracy. Last night, my daughter, in doing an essay on terrorism, asked me for some guidance, and I said, pull up the United Nations website. Have a look at the treaties, have a look at the UN resolutions issued over time. And I was able to suggest to her, after she read it, I said to her, what have you seen? What was terrorism in 1962? What was the big thing in 1970s? Hijacking, planes. Then it was invading embassies. Then it was hostage taking, until we had planes flying in the air, crashing into towers, threat of nuclear sanctions. And I said to my daughter, through you, Madam President, that terrorism mutates. Similarly, financial obligations mutate. Financial regulation mutates. And in this world, the big fish eat the little fish. CARICOM, there was a suggestion that CARICOM should have a unified voice. I wish to say that that issue has been discussed at CARICOM level, but I can say as a past chairman of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force myself, that under Trinidad and Tobago's chairmanship, we unified the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. We improved its output by hundreds of %, and the attorneys general for all of the CARICOM countries have written in collective purpose to the Financial Action Task Force and to other agencies to move as one. We're not sleeping. Taking the advocacy, be it at CSME, at CARICOM, at CFATF, the work is being done. Trinidad and Tobago's anti-terrorism law is now the model law for the whole of the CFATF. How did that happen? Because we operationalized the law. When I came in as Attorney General in 2015, we didn't have a single listing for terrorist financing. We crossed 360 ages ago. And we have done the work. Now, there was a very serious recommendation made by honorable senators on the independent bench. How are we going to operationalize this law? Honorable senators opposite asked, how many, Senator Ramlin, I think it was, how many big fishes have we caught? How many prosecutions have we had? Honorable senators, through you, Madam President, this government has dedicated its first 3 years not to just simply adding more laws to the books. Past governments, and in particular the last government, spent time raising firearms offenses, more jail time, no bail, state of emergency. But none of their laws were dedicated to improving the criminal justice system. Because if you have laws, they must go somewhere. And the question asked opposite is, Senator Richards asked, how are we going to get this done? And in utilizing one of my two favorite expressions, which is let's just start and work our way forward, which is analogous to best is the enemy of good, Senator Richards used the other expression that I like to use, which is what my Jamaican counterparts have said. When I ask them how they do certain things, they tell me it's like flying a plane, except we're building the plane while we're flying it. And I want to put on in answer right now to that incredible situation of just trying to move along, how we're going to get it done. The honorable senators, in particular, the new ones on the independent bench, ought to take notice of the fact, because it's going to become very relevant very shortly. The criminal justice system, in operationalizing this law, this bill, has many moving parts. What are the moving parts? You need a judge, you need a court, you need rules of court, you need a prosecutor, you need a defense lawyer, you need a witness. And in treating with that, this government has made sure that your court has been cleaned. Take a criminal division, marry it up with the magistrates division, take out 102 traffic offenses every year from the court, year on year, move them into violations, introduce 102,000, or not? Forgive me, 102,000, thank you. 102,000 per year. We've said increase the judicial complement. When we came into office, the judicial complement was 36. The statutory complement is now 64. That's a 77% increase. We legislated for the Family and Children Division. We opened the Family and Children Division criminal courts. Thousands of cases are pouring in there. We took, in preparation for the proclamation of plea bargaining, which is imminent, we went into a maximum sentence indication exercise in the prisons, where now 500 prisoners have passed through that loop. There are 4,008 prisoners incarcerated. 500 of them in 2 months alone have been processed out. We did the data analysis. We created, and Cabinet has passed, a public defender system. So if your lawyer is not available as a defense attorney and your trial is going to be delayed, you will soon have a competent attorney paid for by the state representing you. We implemented criminal proceedings rules since 2016. We implemented children's rules in the children's courts. And all of these things go to operationalizing these laws, this bill. The next stage to hit this Honorable Senate and this Parliament is the follow the money package. What is that? Civil asset forfeiture, explain your wealth legislation, drafted before Cabinet. Removal of beneficial ownership, so you could see who the real owner in companies are, already in Parliament. Abolition of preliminary inquiries in the House of Representatives after having had several versions of consultation on it. Registration of deeds amendments, because where do you hide your wealth? In a company or business, in land, or in cash? Cash is dealt with by this, because in relation to cash, there are disclosures from the banking sector and from the Board of Inland Revenue. We went in an exercise of developing all the registries, every bit of motor vehicle registration, driver's permits and registration for vehicles, digitized. 11 million land records from the land registry moved across to the new registry, millions digitized. Creation of a non-profit organization sector to track the money that passes unchecked, already in gear. So there is a whole comprehensive package of work. Electronic payments in the courts for the first time up and running, and in the Registrar General's Division next month, God willing, up and running. So we're taking the society cashless, so you can track the transactions. This bill obviously fits within that purpose. So, on the 30th, Madam President, of November, we were able to write to the Financial Action Task Force. Letter went to the Deputy Executive Director of the CFATF. We asked to be re-rated on 22 of our 40 recommendations. In other words, then we said to them, bump us up on 22 items. We did that specifically so that we could be seen as a nation that is continuing to evolve in the right direction of growth. We will have a face-to-face meeting with our assessors in January. After the face-to-face meeting with our assessors, they will consider our material in February in the Financial Action Task Force, and in March or May for the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. The deadline for the Global Forum is in the context of the Global Forum saying to us, if you had passed your Income Tax Amendment Act in December, we will consider doing your peer review in January by the 31st of December. And if we do your peer review in January, we will invite you to sign on to the Multilateral Convention, which will allow us to do bills number 2 and bills number 3. So it isn't that the dates are being changed. or that it is confusing. It is just simply that the opposition is confused. Because this is in the public domain, on the websites, on the methodologies. It's easy to create confusion, but if you take aside all of the he say, she say, the only argument that comes from the opposition today, distilled by honorable members on the opposition bench, is your law is unconstitutional and we go into court. I think that it will speak leaps and bounds for Trinidad and Tobago to see the opposition challenge in a court of law this piece of legislation to stop the police and the Financial Intelligence Unit from getting taxpayer information. I think that that's a wonderful summary of what frightens honorable members opposite on the opposition bench. Because Senator Vera said it. We on this side are subjecting ourselves to the law without whimper, without complaint, and without bacchanal. The only voices opposite in the country are 18 people in the House of Representatives and 6 in the Senate. And dare I say, 1.3 million people say yes, 18 in the House say no, and 6 in the Senate say no. I could live with those odds. So, Madam President, it is quite interesting that the Shakespearean reference and reflection upon protesting too much seems to have some validity in this very House.
350,000 people voted for the UNC.
Madam President, the fact is that this law is proportional. The standing orders of the House of Representatives, the standing orders of the Senate set our procedure. They say if you have an amendment to make, put it in writing. May, June, July, August, September, October, November, 4th of December we stand now. Not a line of amendment can come from 18 plus 6 people who are receiving the benefit of taxpayers' money to do work in the Parliament.
We'll meet you in court.
8, 7, going on 8 calendar months. Not a soul, as Senator Haynes puts it in her diligent work, could bother to write one line on one clause. So let's go to the bill. Clause 1. This act may be cited as the Income Tax Amendment Act, the name of the act. Clause 2, the act means the Income Tax Act. Clause 3, amend the long title. Clause 4, put the FIU and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to collect tax-paying information within the parameters of the existing law. Clause 5, if you use it for the wrong purpose, take a penalty and take some jail. 6 pages if you take the certification clause. If you put it on single point, single line, you probably can't cross 2 pages of a bill. And 8 months later, the diligent, hard-working members of the opposition, find it funny and humorous that we can't have one line of written amendments to come from an entire opposition bench. Mind you, their position, coming from Senator Big, first contribution I get by crosstalk. Better we do your work. I'm sure it's more than the work you did when you were at the AG's office. And Madam President,
Attorney General, please.
You said no.
Attorney General, that was unnecessary, and you should withdraw it. And your time, use the rest of your time to deal with the matter.
I happily withdraw it, even though it may not be unparliamentary. I take your guidance.
No, it is unparliamentary.
I take your guidance.
Attorney,
I've withdrawn.
Yes,
It's on the record. I withdraw. So, Madam President, I say that because the records demonstrate what is work or not. The record is simply circulate your submissions. If honorable members look on the tables right now, tell me if you see a scrap of paper coming from the opposition. Circulated amendments. Under the hand of Senator Wade Mark, Senator Haynes, Senator Hussain, Senator Obika, Senator Ramdeen, and the talented Senator Big. Not one scrap of paper. And I say that to demonstrate where we are. This is why we made this submission on the back of the UNC's work, that this was a simple bill for an important purpose, for a legitimate aim, in proportionate circumstances. The allegation that this is simple is demonstrated by the fact that there are no recommendations for amendment. And that is just the end of the story. So, Madam President, we have to report to the FATF. We have to meet a January deadline. We have another piece of law which we hope the Cabinet will approve for introduction into this Senate to treat with amendments to several pieces of law, again for regulatory purposes. We are not trading our sovereignty in doing this, because you can maintain your sovereignty and stay by yourself. Just cut off your correspondent banking, cut off your international transactions, forget about your food importation bill of nearly $3 billion. Don't worry with your foreign exchange. Crash your Securities and Exchange market. Ensure that your children can't go to school. Ensure that schools can't have supplies and hospitals can't have supplies. Ensure that people can't even eat doubles. And I say that again because that is the most typical Trinidad and Tobago dish that we all love. But the chana is bought from abroad, the oil, the curry, the salt, and the paper, and the flour. And I say that to tell you that this is not sky will fall material. This is a slow boil. And I think that the nation understands the purpose here. We look forward to any amendments that may be volunteered in the course of the committee's discussion. Madam President, I think it's safe to say that the case has been answered, and we hope that the honourable members opposite will have meaningful support given to this bill, and I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act be now read a second time. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act.
Attorney General.
Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 66-1, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act be committed to a committee of the whole Senate forthwith to be considered clause by clause.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act be committed to a committee of the whole Senate forthwith to be considered clause by clause. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The Senate shall now go into the committee of the whole to consider the bill clause by clause. Obika, Senator Hussain, Senator Big, would you like to take a seat? Senator, oh, on this side. Yeah.
Clauses 1 and 2.
The question is that clauses 1 and 2 stand a part of the bill. Honourable Senators, the question is that clauses 1 and 2 now stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Clauses 1 and 2 now stand part of the bill.
Clause 3.
The question is that clause 3 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 3 now stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Clause 3 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 4.
The question is that clause 4 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 4 now stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Clause 4 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 5.
The question is that clause 5 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 5 now stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Clause 5 now stands part of the bill. Attorney General. Okay. Honourable Senators, the question is that the bill be now reported to the Senate. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The bill will now be reported to the Senate. Attorney General.
Madam President, I wish to report that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act was considered in Committee of the Whole and approved without amendments. I now beg to move that the Senate agree with the committee's report.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the Senate agree with the committee's report on a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No. Division.
Mr. Khan,
Yes.
Mrs. Gopi Schoon,
Yes.
Mrs. Batiste Primus,
Yes.
Mr. Rambarat,
Yes.
Mr. Sinanan,
Yes.
Mr. Moses,
Yes.
Mr. Hussain,
Yes.
Miss West,
Yes.
Mr. LaHunt,
Yes.
Dr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Singh,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Dookie,
Yes.
Mr. Simonet,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Mark,
No.
Miss Haynes,
No.
Mr. Hussain,
No.
Mr. Obika,
No.
Mr. Ramdeen,
No.
Mr. Baig,
No.
Mr. Richards,
Yes.
Miss Choate SC,
Yes.
Mr. Vieira,
Yes.
Dr. Dial Singh,
Yes.
Miss Dionarine,
Yes.
Miss C. Prasad,
Yes.
Mr. Timal,
Yes.
Mrs. Toms Nai,
Yes.
Dr. Dylan Remy.
Yes.
2460. Madam President, the results of the division are 24 voted for, 6 voted against, and no abstentions.
Honourable Senators, 24 senators voted for the bill, 6 voted against, and no one abstained. Attorney General.
Madam President, as this is the important one, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act be forthwith read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act be now read a third time and passed. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no.
No division. No, we want a division.
Mr. Khan.
Yes.
Mrs. Gopi Schoon.
Yes.
Mrs. Batiste Primus.
Yes.
Mr. Rambarat.
Yes.
Mr. Sinanan.
Yes.
Mr. Moses.
Yes.
Mr. Hussein.
Yes.
Ms. West.
Yes.
Mr. LeHunt.
Yes.
Dr. Henry.
Yes.
Mr. Singh.
Yes.
Mr. Cummings.
Yes.
Mr. Dookie.
Yes.
Mr. Simonet.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Mark.
No.
Ms. Haynes.
No.
Mr. Hussein.
No.
Mr. Obika.
No.
Mr. Ramdeen.
No.
Mr. Beeg.
No.
Mr. Richards.
Affirmative.
Ms. Choate SC.
Yes.
Mr. Vieira.
Yes.
Dr. Dial Singh.
Yes.
Ms. Dionarine.
Yes.
Ms. C. Prasad.
Yes.
Mr. Timal.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson-Nai.
Yes.
Dr. Dylan Remy.
Yes.
Madam President, the results of the division are 24 voted for, 6 voted against, and no abstentions.
Honourable Senators, 24 senators voted in favour of the bill, 6 senators voted against, and no one abstained. The bill has therefore been passed.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, 11th December 2018 at 1:30 p.m. During that sitting, we will be debating the bill entitled An Act to Amend the Magistrate Protection Act.
Honourable Senators, before I put the question on the adjournment, leave has been granted for 2 matters to be raised on the motion for the adjournment. Senator Obika.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The issue is the need for the government to urgently review its policy regarding the GATE program in relation to privately owned higher learning institutions. Now, I wish to demonstrate the urgency of this matter using 2 professions. One is the accounting profession, and the other is the hospitality and tourism industry. Now, Madam President, under the PNM government led by Dr. Keith Rowley, the field of accountancy is under attack. This is so because based on the new criteria set out, the main institutions that offer the ACCA qualification have stopped receiving GATE funding for new entrants. So this disturbing parallel is increased when you look at the fact that the University of the West Indies has long since discontinued its Masters in Accountancy at the University in St. Augustine. So therefore, if you are required to attain education up to the chartered level, so to be a chartered accountant in Trinidad and Tobago, where the main provider that we are familiar with is the ACCA qualification, you will be prevented from accessing GATE funding. This, Madam President, is a sinister act meted out to the students of Trinidad and Tobago by this government. I want to show 2 schools that this has affected significantly. The Students' Accountancy Center with branches in St. James, Chaguanas, and San Fernando, and Omar Dean School of Accounting. Those from San Fernando will be very familiar with that prominent building on Cepero Street in San Fernando. Now, Madam President, the government will always speak to leaner times and the fact that they support state-owned institutions such as UE, UTT, COSTAT, etc. But when you examine the fact that the main qualification in the accounting profession is that of ACCA, it means that either the government's action was sinister against the profession of accounting, or they fumbled the ball of graduate assistance for tertiary education expenses so badly that they surreptitiously cut out accountancy, the profession of accountancy, almost entirely from government funding. Now, this, however, is very pertinent, in particular when the government is singing a mantra of following, albeit not finding any money, following the money. We saw a case in West Moorings earlier today. We don't know if they're going to find any money there, where there are allegations of someone related to our government minister. But the professions of forensic auditing, actuarial science, and the skilled accountancy profession that the banking sector depends on so much to engage in their practices of compliance, adherence, and stuff, Madam President, will be negatively affected by this. And I'm hearing the grumblings of the Minister of Public Utilities, himself trained in accounting. He should be the first person agreeing with me. Madam President, there's a quote from George Orwell stating, "During times of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act," from his book, 1984. So I've raised this point today to let the truth be revealed. So the government may call me what they may for raising this matter. That's okay. But I'm sure the hundreds of new entrants to the field of accounting will be happy to know that there's an opposition senator and there's a party by the name of the United National Congress that will raise their issues in Parliament despite government opposition. Now, Madam President, I'm sure you would agree with me that when you look at the other profession, that of hospitality and tourism, and the fact that this government is committing billions of our tax-paying dollars to build a plant in Tobago for sandals, but the Tourism Institute in Trinidad, that is the only institute charged with the responsibility for training professionals in the hospitality and tourism industry in Trinidad, because there's one in Tobago, is not receiving gate funding. In fact, Madam President, you would be disturbed to know that if you were to turn to because I know the last time I presented figures, someone opposite said it was fake news. So if you were to turn to the estimates, details of estimates of recurrent expenditure for the financial year 2018, and you look on page 183, line item 18, you have the TTHTI, Trinidad and Tobago Hospitality and Tourism Institute. And the estimate for the fiscal year gone was $6 million. $6 million. When you speak, Madam President, to the administrators at the institute, you know how much they got from this allocation, which is separate from gate funding? Zero. Zero. Then, Madam President, if you turn now to the newspaper, and there's an article of the 22nd of June 2018 in the Newsday titled, "Dad Cries Foul Over TTHTI Fees." And there's a father, he was lamenting, he said spontaneously the ending of last year, they approached the children for a meeting and only then told them the government is removing gate subsidies and the children have to pay TTHTI over $12,000 per student. Madam President, moving from less than $1,000 to $12,000. Do you know that the student population at the TTHTI has declined by 500 students, down from over 700 to just about 250? Madam President, only an irresponsible government would continue with the situation as is. Only an irresponsible government. Madam President, could I ask how much more time I have? Thank you very much. So only an irresponsible government would continue with that. So we have an institution where they were owed $5 million last year, September. They had to take the government to court. They sent them pre-action protocol letters, and then they got back that $5 million. But they have not been getting gate funding since. Therefore, the students have to pay. And this government is committing to spend billions of dollars behind Sanders. And they can't spend a few millions per annum behind the students who are to be the industry professionals who are to work in Sanders. So we have given up our entire tourism sector to one company, Sanders, at the expense of what we have in Trinidad and Tobago, TTHTI. Madam President, on behalf of the accounting profession and the hospitality and tourism profession, I say the government must rescind this action and provide gate funding and government subventions to these institutions. I thank you very much.
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Thank you, Madam President. I have to apologize for Senator Obika arguing a completely different motion. His motion, Madam President, deals with the need for the government to urgently review its policy regarding the GATE program in relation to privately owned higher learning institutions. He's argued a case in respect of the TTHTI, which is, as he acknowledges, owned by the state.
You have presented your motion. The minister is responding. Please listen in silence. Please listen in silence. Senator Obika, you know very well that a minister is entitled to answer the motion however the minister wishes to. Okay? Continue, Minister.
Madam President, thanks for your protection, even in the House. As I was saying, Madam President, I've been forced to deal with emotion other than the motion. And I understand why Senator Obika changed his whole approach. The fact is, Madam President, who can argue against an administration that in 2004 created GATE? And this GATE currently supports 2,608 accredited programs at both public and private institutions, including, Madam President, you'll be happy to know, including the BSc Accounting program at the University of the Southern Caribbean. My friend continues to argue his own motion. And also, Madam President, the MBA in Finance and Accounting at the University of the Southern Caribbean. And I could go on and on, Madam President, but I know I would not do that to my colleagues. So that is accounting. The TTHTI continues to function. Among the programs being funded are the Bachelor of Administration in Hospitality and Tourism Management, among other things. I'm not going to regale you with all the hospitality and accounting. I'm just putting an end to your assertion that we've not dealt with accounting and hospitality. And you know, in the hospitality industry, you have IT, we have IT programs. You have administration, we have administration. You have human resource. Madam President, if you wish, I can take you through the 2,608 accredited programs in public and private institutions, but I don't think you want me to do that. I will close by saying, Madam President, my friend also abandoned his motion because he knows that after creating GATE in 2004, in 2016, the government conducted a comprehensive review of GATE. A task force was appointed. I would not read the 2 pages of the members. Based on the task force work, a report was tendered in July 2016. In August 2016, the Cabinet approved some specific changes to GATE. And on account of the review and the changes in GATE, some institutions, and his original motion addressed private institutions, some institutions remained in the program, and other institutions, particularly private institutions, are no longer in GATE because they are not accredited by a completely different body, the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago. The government puts no obstruction in the way of any institution, public or private, wishing to pursue accreditation through the ACTT and thereafter qualify to have their programs sponsored by GATE. And that is the position, Madam President. 2,608 accredited programs, including accounting and hospitality. I thank you.
Mark.
Yes, thank you very much.
Madam President, approximately 2 months ago, there was a major protest by students at the university campus, St. Augustine, where they engaged in activities aimed at highlighting the lack of safety and security on the campus. Madam President, as you are aware, this protest arose out of a report that a criminal element attempted to rape, rob, and assault a female student at the university's female locker room on the campus. The matter came on the heels of a string of reports, both official and unofficial, of robberies, assaults against students on the campus. At the time, the campus administration was a bit insensitive to the cries and pleas of the students, describing the attempted rape as attempted robbery. That angered the students even further, and it led to, as I said, major protests. In that particular activity engaged by students, we had the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service being invited. The question is by whom on the campus? And several students would have received injuries. 2 were arrested and charged, and they are before the courts at this time. On the heels of that development, Madam President, came the news of a 26-year-old manager employed at UWI. I wouldn't call the name of the individual, was abducted and kidnapped in broad daylight, 3 o'clock in the evening, as she attempted to leave the campus to collect her 6-year-old daughter. She has since been released safely into the hands of her family. But, Madam President, the question is that something is amiss at UWI. We know that this nation is engulfed, inundated with criminality and violence. We are rushing towards 500 murders in this country in the coming days. And, Madam President, we know of the brutality that citizens are faced with. But students who are attending the university ought to be guaranteed some degree of safety and security as they pursue their studies. So I've raised this matter this evening to get from the government a perspective on measures that have been taken. My information as I speak, Madam President, is that the TTPS has some patrols on the campus, and they have a partnership with the UWI Estate Police. I don't know if that is sufficient. I know that the Student Guild, based on what I've read in the newspapers, reports that they had called for the installation of security cameras. They had also called for the establishment of some system of identification card to be scanned to gain entry on the campus. I don't know what the current situation is as it concerns that. What I do know, Madam President, is that the administration of UWI experienced a 5% cut in their budget, as many other institutions. And this resulted in a cut, I would suspect, in their security budget, even though I read somewhere where the principal indicated that they had increased the budgetary allocation to, I think, 8% or some amount to that effect. So, Madam President, I want to emphasize that peaceful protest is a right that citizens enjoy in this country. And I was a bit taken aback at the excessive use of force by the police, with the greatest respect to the new Commissioner of Police and his style. I believe, Madam President, that students were brutalized on that day on the campus. And I think really an investigation ought to have been triggered by the university administration to get to the bottom of this, Madam President, to determine exactly who called in the police at the time when the police were called in, and whether the local estate police located on campus were not able to control the protests at the time, and therefore we require some clarification, some direction, some information as to this entire matter. So, Madam President, I've raised this matter because I think that there's need for us in this Parliament to get a report from the government through the university as to the measures that would have been taken to bring about a greater level of security and safety for the UWI population at the campus. And I would like to get from the government a current status report on what has been done since that incident 2 months ago to provide that kind of safety and security for the students of the University of the West Indies. Thank you, Madam President.
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I thank my colleague, Senator Mark, for raising this very important issue on the steps taken or what has been done at the university to deal with security concerns. Of course, Senator Mark knows that the government is not directly involved at UE, but we do in fact have a responsibility to provide support, particularly on the issue of security. Madam President, in the 2017-2018 period, the university did 4 things in relation to improving security. And let me say right away, Madam President, Senator Mark is absolutely correct, something I don't say very often. There was, in fact, an 8%, 7.6% increase in the allocation to security in this fiscal year. And in the last fiscal year, 2017-2018, the university did the following: developed a campus risk profile to identify risks and threats and to define what needed to be done, with specific emphasis on the Faculty of Engineering, Science and Technology, Medical Science, and the School of Education. Secondly, the university engaged in the training and development of staff in the areas of conflict resolution, customer service, first aid and CPR, surveillance and counter-surveillance, dealing with extremism on campus, supervisory management, leadership, firearm training, including active shooter response, road safety, addressing workplace bullying, and finally, mental illness and disabilities and their impact on campus safety. I'm sure Senator Dial Singh is taking note of that one. Thirdly, Madam President, the university has signed an MOU with the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators so that it can further its work in relation to the security concerns on the campus. And fourthly, the university has been engaged in the systematic gathering, assessing, and processing of information relating to security intelligence and evidence so that it could improve its output in relation to security management. And those were the things done in the last fiscal year. Madam President, Senator Mark has asked for a report on what is happening in relation to security in general. The first thing the University of the West Indies would like to make in relation, the first point is that because of the open nature of the university, it presents particular risks in relation to security management, the access that the public has. So over the years, it has been continuously improving its security systems to deal with the open nature. Secondly, the university has placed paramount importance on the safety of students, and where there are issues, as you've pointed out, Senator Mark, in relation to what happened last week and some weeks ago, which gave rise to the student protests, the university places the victims at the heart of its response to security issues. The third is that, as you know, the university maintains a 24-hour security detail campus-wide using manpower, technology, and continuous training. And Senator Mark, you'd be happy to know that the manpower strength at the university was increased in the last fiscal year, and the university intends to increase it in this fiscal year, again, using a combination of its own security personnel and contracted security. I've spoken already about the budget increase, and the university also provides some specific services and facilities for students to deal with potential security concerns. One is campus security escort service is available from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. There are designated secure study areas. There's a students' shuttle service. There's a 24-hour patrolled walkways which are well lit. And there are emergency phone units, 17 of them, strategically placed in locations in central parts of the campus. And when activated, it puts the caller in direct contact with the security services charge room. The university, Madam President, has also embarked on a project called Rescue, R-E-S-Q, which is the development of an app. The app was launched on September 18, 2018 as a pilot project to allow students to use an alert system on their smartphones. And the pilot has targeted 1,200 students to undergo training in the proper use. And the university believes that when Rescue becomes fully operational, it can be activated by students using the app, and it would put them in direct contact with relief. Madam President, we all understand the need to continuously improve the security of our students at the university and elsewhere. The government is committed, insofar as it could do so, to continue to support the University of the West Indies, particularly at our campus in St. Augustine. I thank you.
Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, the 11th of December, 2018, at 1:30 p.m. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to Tuesday, the 11th of December, 2018, at 1:30 p.m.